Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Matt down in the catacombs for the Remnant Underground. First off, some apologies for missing the last couple of weeks in our Remnant Underground schedule. This was completely my fault. It was unavoidable. Death visited the Matt family this past week, and it was very difficult. To tell you the truth, we're still trying to respond to the passing of my sister Gretchen. By the way, many of you sent condolences about her passing after liver transplant, or an attempted liver transplant surgery a couple of weeks ago. Very grateful to that. It didn't work out, but thank you very much for your prayers and good wishes and so forth. They mean a great deal to us. So again, my apologies and assurances that we will get back on schedule. But you know, it's interesting. We really don't know the first thing about death, do we? I mean, since the Garden of Eden, people have been dying, and yet what do we really know about this great mystery of death? What happens when we take the last breath? I mean, really, what happens? What does the person dying, what does he see? Where does he go? And more importantly, perhaps, how does he go? The fact is, there is no data compiled by folks who've gone through this that we can consult to find out what to expect. Every man is on his own. And as the old medieval morality play points out, nobody's going to come with us. Not our friends, not our wealth, not our family, not fellowship. They all stay behind. And the best that we can hope and pray for is that our pale and weak and depleted virtues may have enough stamina and strength from what we gave them or how we practiced them during life to stand up and stand with us. That's about the best we can hope for. So I don't know about you, but for me, death is something that always seems to be happening to someone else. I don't really know anything about it. I think a lot about it, but it's always someone else's problem. And yet, without fail, when death visits itself upon someone we love or know, there's always this brief flicker of envy for the deceased, for the dead guy involved now, because now he knows everything. He's unlocked the mysteries that we've all wondered about all of our life, and that man has been wondering about for thousands and thousands of years. Now the dead fellow knows it all. Now she knows it all, everything. All the mysteries of life that we've been wondering about since we were kids. Everyone in this audience will be dead in 50 years. You know, maybe a couple years more, a couple years less, but roughly 50 years. Unless we have a lot of 5-year-olds watching our program, and I doubt that. So most of us are going to be dead in a half century. And the modern world doesn't seem to want us to think about that. You know, we've got constant entertainment, constant amusement, 24/7 stimulation, music in the headphones, noise, more noise, and constant concerns about making money and making more money. For what? What are we making all this money for? The important thing is not to make money in this life, right? Isn't there something more? Haven't for several millennia, weren't there greater concerns that man had for the reason that he was put on this life and put on this earth, other than just to make money, just to plant his crops, just to do whatever? It seems to me the concerns of the soul were much greater than they are now. Now we're not even supposed to talk about this stuff. We talk about other things. We want to be a woman. I want to be a man. I don't want to keep my baby. I want an abortion. I want to divorce my wife. I want. Constantly. There was just self-indulgent, sanctimonious nonsense about living life to its fullest. I want to travel the world. I want to do this. Anything other than take seriously that last moment when we draw our last breath. But a few weeks ago, I had a chat with a man who was condemned to die by disease. He's lying on his deathbed, and I'm on the telephone talking to him. He's putting his affairs in order. And what struck me most was that the two things that mattered most to my friend at that moment are the two things that this world and that our society now is trying to crush more than anything else: family and faith. We either believe in God or we don't, said John Vennari just a couple days before he died. I do believe, and I know that God has known from all eternity that I would be here in this hospital at this very moment, ready to go to him. Not a bad way to face death. And after a hard-fought battle with colon cancer, John Vennari's death, and I'm of course referring to the editor of Catholic Family News. For those of you who are new to our program, Catholic Family News will continue under some of John's friends and his wife Susan, so we're very glad to hear that. But now John, the former editor, the now deceased editor of Catholic Family News, his death is part of history. Now he knows everything. And it wasn't easy for him. I was talking to him at one point, again on the telephone, and he said something about a treatment that he was undergoing. It wasn't pleasant. And he said he'd have to be doing this for the rest of his life. Then he stopped, he paused, and he said, "Did you hear what I just said, Michael? The rest of my life." And for me, that's only a few months. And it was like he couldn't believe what he was saying. He accepted it, but it was hard to believe that it was true. Yet it was. So death wasn't easy for this man, and this man was a good man, a daily communicant, good husband and father, one of the best Catholics I've ever met. And he had the right fear of what he was facing in this adversary of death. It wasn't easy for him, especially for him, because he loved life, and he loved his kids, and he loved his wife, and he loved his friends. You know, that's another thing. There's actually nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with loving the life that God has given us and for not wanting it to end. Sometimes traditional Catholics take on a little too much of a stoic position on that. Oh, gee, he died. Good. He went right to heaven. That's fantastic. Good for him. Well, yeah, you know, life is a beautiful thing, and it's a gift from God, and John knew that. He appreciated life and love and laughter and all the little things. So death was formidable. He wasn't looking forward to it. He was afraid of the uncertainties of death, the mysteries of death, just like every wise man should be. But he faced it with faith. He confronted it with hope, and he prepared for it all of his life. And in that we can take sort of a final lesson from this man who taught us so much by the way he lived his Catholic life. You know, John Vennari was old school, no question about it. His life was all about sort of big picture battle for perseverance. You know, he hated the revolution of the Second Vatican Council and the Church because it tried to remove the reality of death from our lives, a reality that he sought to remind his readers of, that death was imminent for all of us. Maybe a few months, maybe a few years. Anyway, it's coming. And he resented that. He resented the fact they took away the sacrifice of Christ, the death of Christ from the Mass, or they removed references to the sacrifice. He resented the fact they took away the black vestments and the Dies Irae from the Requiem. He talked about how he'd been to a funeral where they sang, "Gonna take a sentimental journey," and it drove him crazy. You know, the way that they had taken the reality of death even away from Requiem, from the end, from the final funeral Mass of Catholics. And to say nothing of the four last things being removed from topics of interest in the pulpit of the Novus Ordo Church. He really resented this. In a nutshell, the revolution, as he saw it, tried to insulate the modern world from the reality of death. And we're all about feeding poor people and just doing feel-good exercises and going along to getting along. All religions are the same as long as you're nice to people. He really resented that. And John didn't pretend to have all the answers about all of these mysteries. He certainly did not. It wasn't about personal infallibility, how he couldn't err. In fact, that's why he was so unwilling to move away from tradition, because he knew, as every Catholic should know, that clinging to the defined and dogmas of the Church, to the infallible teachings of Holy Mother Church, was the only security that we have. It was anything but his personal opinion on things that mattered. So it wasn't about view counts or numbers of subscribers for CFN or hits or popularity of his videos. That's not what it was about. It was about the message. It was about truth. It was about a Catholic's duty to defend the truth of Christ at a moment in history when it's under virulent attack. And when the potential fallout from that attack was what? The loss of millions and millions of souls, potentially. So what am I saying? I don't know. I'm trying to remember a wonderful man and a good friend now that he's passed. And I don't want to see the passing of this great man, this old school man, go without us taking notice of what motivated John Vennari, what made him what he was, what made his work so successful. We all saw in John a warrior from the old days who knew how to laugh, sure, but he also knew how to laugh at himself as well, to not take himself so seriously as to confuse his principal defense of Christ's truth with mere self-defense of personal opinions and prudential judgments that may or may not have been correct on his part. He didn't answer every petty attack leveled against him either. Why? Because he understood that we're all broken vessels, that we're all walking wounded of this revolution. Because first and foremost, he didn't matter to him. His little opinion wasn't what it was about. Therefore, John wasn't into tearing people down who didn't agree with him. And when he was attacked by various entities, organizations, or individuals for being this or that, or not being enough of this or enough of that, for the most part, he shrugged it off and decided to defend only the truth and the principles involved, and not his opinion, not his strategy, not his way of doing things. You see the difference? And so when one of his critics, for example, a very popular internet TV guy, when he spent the better part of a year blasting John as a quasi-schismatic, not in full communion with the church and so forth, and then this same critic later on had to make a public confession that he had spent most of his life, his adult life, as a practicing homosexual, living a life of depravity. After he had made that confession, John, a guy who had been the target of this fellow's attack for a long time, John just left it alone. Never said a word. Does anybody notice that? You remember? John Vennari didn't fire back when this guy was down. Doesn't that mean anything in the age of the internet and tweets and Facebook and everything else? In the age of social media, this is extraordinary in my opinion. Because now, when your opponent falls, these days you crush him, you kick him, and you make sure he never gets up again. But that's not the Catholic way. That's not Christ-like. That's not what John Vennari was doing with anybody. And so he let this poor guy, a fellow human being, a brother in Christ, try to find his own way back up. Now, John always kept his eye on the endgame, on Christ, on the kingship of Christ, on Christ's church. That's what motivated him. That's what, in his opinion, that's what it meant to be a traditional Catholic, to defend these things with your life if need be, to pass on and defend what was handed down to him. And that's the old faith, and that's all it was about. It wasn't, I'm a genius, I figured it all out, I'm a saint. It was nothing like that. But rather it was to try to take the millions of lost souls, or potentially lost souls, by the hand and lovingly try to lead them back to Christ, where they were supposed to be all along, had the shepherds not led them astray and deceived them. John understood, all of us, Catholics, Neo-Catholics, we're all victims of this thing. We're certainly all sinners, and not one of us has it all figured out. It's just that the traditional Catholic has the benefit of 2,000 years of teaching, and that's what he leaned on in order to point to some authority to get us through this madness of the past 50 years especially. So, especially now, ladies and gentlemen, in 2017, as things really seem to be spinning out of control from Washington, D.C., the Trump administration, this Pope, who, as far as I'm concerned, is hands down the most dangerous Pope in history, and certainly John Vennari knew this. But as we face all these uncertainties, I think we need to take the example that John provided for us and try to pattern ourselves after that a little bit. Because bad things are coming, and we need to prepare for a fight like no one's ever seen. And it's not only a fight against the enemy, but it's a fight against doubt and despair in ourselves. It's a fight for us to keep the faith, so that maybe we can do something to help others. If we don't keep the faith, or if we lose charity, if we lose hope, we're going to be just as useless as the worst apostate out there. So I have great respect for John, so much respect that I want to hold him up here now that he's died, he's passed away. And I want to say, here's an example of a guy who never forgot what this war is all about. It's about the salvation of souls. It's about family. It's about faith. It's about Christ. It's about our own salvation. It's not about our opinions. It's a holy war, but it's not about our opinions. What are we as traditional Catholics, if not a ragtag remnant of the mighty Catholic army that is now almost completely destroyed and depleted? We are what John Vennari rather famously called a loose-knit federation of warring tribes. And we need to pick our game up a little bit, as he tried to do. We're dealing with the harsh reality that our shepherds have destroyed our Mass, have destroyed our churches, stolen the very idea of what it means to be a Catholic. But that is no reason to become to despair, to go out and start our own church, or to condemn and rip those who don't understand what's happened to them or to their kids. And if we're going to hang on at all through the apocalyptic days that I believe are coming, and certainly John believed are coming very soon, if we're going to hang on at all, it's going to be by the grace of God, and it's going to be through our own fidelity to Him and to the traditions of His church. That's the only life raft that we have left. by practicing virtue, by developing devotion to the Mother of God. Heck, John Vennari spent half his adult life on earth going on and on and on about Our Lady's role in all of this.
And the Virgin Mary appeared to Sister Lucy in May of 1952 and said, "Make it known to the Holy Father that I am always awaiting the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart. Without the consecration, Russia will not be able to convert, nor will the world have peace."
About devotion to the true face of Jesus Christ, about Fatima, about the Rosary, about the Scapular, about the First Fridays. That's all he cared about were those things. Not exactly popular ideas that are going to light up your YouTube view count. Not exactly the sort of thing that's going to earn you invitations to Fox News Channel to share your commentaries on the news of the day. But John didn't care about that. He didn't care what the world thought of our old and antiquated and quaint notions about Jesus and Mary and little Saint Philomena whom he loved, Monsignor Fenton or the Four Less Things and all the rest. He didn't care about the very best HTML on his websites and so forth. He was a humble warrior that knew that everything we do must begin and end with true devotion to the Mother of God. Again, not exactly the sort of thing that makes you a rock star in the modern church. The entire revolution was all about forcing the world to abandon these things, to abandon the things that matter most when, indeed, we take that last breath on this earth, when death comes knocking. The four last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. Nobody cares about that. Nobody cares about the message that actually matters at this most pivotal point in our lives. When we die, nobody cares, because that message is all about him, all about Christ, who we're trying to crucify. It's just that simple. I realize the world doesn't care, doesn't take any of what I'm saying right now seriously, but it's all that matters. The faith of a child is what they're attempting to eradicate from the face of the earth. The faith of a child, not an intellectual, not some brilliant academic, a child. The one who can believe in the real presence, who loves the Virgin Mary, who patterns their lives after little humble saints that the world never cared about. You see what I'm saying? We can't lose sight of that. We're not sophisticated in the eyes of the world, and we never can be considered such without ceasing to be who we are. To the extent that we follow Jesus Christ and preach devotion to his mother, we're a bunch of backward, hillbilly rubes who need not be taken seriously by anyone in the world today, anywhere, at any time. That's the extent to which the revolution has been victorious. The things that matter don't matter at all. There were only a few people at the foot of the cross, and I'm certainly not comparing myself to those few people at the foot of the cross, but it seems to me those are the people who are trying to earn the right to stand somewhere near in this life. And there were only a few at the foot of the cross the first time. And there will be only a few at the foot of the cross now, the cross on which the modern world has nailed the mystical body of Christ in our own time. And the question is, do we have what it takes to be counted in that number at the foot of the modern cross? Do we have what it takes to be part of this thing called the remnant? Do we have the faith? Is our faith strong enough to make us the mockery of the world and to continue on anyway, to not care what the world thinks? Or will the world find us sophisticated? God help us if that ever happens. And thank God, I don't believe it ever happened to our friend John Vennari. So as we pray for the repose of the soul of this great, great man, John Vennari, let's ask him to intercede for us too, to keep us grounded in the old faith and in the practice of virtue that makes strong soldiers, to make sure that this war never becomes about us, our popularity, or personal vindication, but rather always and forever about truth, tradition, and calling a spade, no matter who is using it to bury God. Thanks for listening, friends. Please keep the old faith. Pray for the repose of the soul of our friend John Vennari. I'm Michael Matt down in the underground, and we'll see you next week.